Another archaeological gold mine sits just below the tombs of the workers. Here, Egyptologist Mark Lehner has hit pay dirt. But it was not easy to find. Dr. Lehner started mapping the entire pyramid plateau in the 1980s. Then Mark, like his colleague Zahi Hawass, was vexed by a problem. Where were the builders? He had found the quarries where they had cut the stone for the pyramids, but where did they live? If he could find them, or any trace of their lives, he'd find a treasure trove of information about how the pyramids were built. Somewhere in the shadow of the pyramids, Mark knew a great city was hiding, the lost city of the pyramids.
When we first started excavating, we didn't know quite what to expect. We had many pyramids and tombs, but we didn't know how the people lived. So when you gather people together in tens of thousands for building a pyramid, what imprint does it leave?
Less than a mile from the Great Pyramid, at the edge of a Cairo suburb, he found that imprint.
In one of our first excavation seasons, a backhoe, a machine, dug a hole through the site and narrowly missed 3 large vats of pottery. These pottery vats first appeared above a surface of black, consistent ash. So consistent, we called it black velvet. We knew we must be on to an ancient bakery, because of tomb scenes, where they show themselves making bread in large pots just like those that filled the southern end of this bakery. But nobody had actually seen them so huge. They're conical inside, and we knew that they must have formed the bread loaves that we see them carrying for the offering scenes in the tombs. We had seen the tomb scenes, but we had never found a bakery where they actually did this.
Excited by the find, they expanded the site, and it just kept growing. The remains of one wall led to another and another, in a growing grid of mud brick buildings and orderly streets. In an archaeological heartbeat, they had uncovered a site that stretched over more than 6 football fields. Not only was it one of the largest dig sites ever cleared in Egypt, it was the weirdest. Archaeologists had never found a town like this before, anywhere.
These great streets separating long rows of galleries is not what we expected. It didn't look like housing. It didn't look like a campsite. We'd never seen anything quite like it.
Mark became even more intrigued when the team kept finding the same thing over and over, bakery after bakery. This was not evidence of some bizarre bread-worshipping cult. Lehner had discovered a key to the Egyptian success.
Finding it replicated on the scale of hundreds of bakeries basically gave us an insight into how the pyramid was made. In a very early period of Egyptian history, they didn't have Wonder Bread factories. They just took the way they did things in their homes, in their houses, and they repeated it many, many, many times. This was baking of an industrial scale, not some household kitchen.
Through the bakeries, we could now glimpse into the world of the pyramid builders, a place where the massive loaves were the staple food. The bakeries provided a model for understanding the whole complex pyramid project. Hundreds of bakeries for thousands of workers who were lifting millions of stones for their pharaoh's pyramid.
As we peeled back the sand from the desert, we did find the footprint of a city of the pyramids. We found a city, but it wasn't where people were living. It was where they were working.
And they weren't just baking bread. They were preparing food on a scale that would put an army field kitchen to shame.
In our excavations of the ruins of this city of the pyramids, we find thousands and thousands of pieces of cattle bone. In fact, along Main Street of the city, we find those kinds of bones that would have been left behind in butchering, jaw bones and teeth and knuckle bones. This made us wonder, was a large part of the street and the city given over to the slaughter of cattle and the preparation of meat?
Even more ancient food secrets were hiding in the ruins of the city. To find them, Lehner and his team pushed the search deeper into the dirt. Every millimeter of sand taken from the site is sifted and cataloged. Hundreds of thousands of pottery shards, tiny fragments of charcoal, even seeds. Everything is analyzed and recorded in minute detail. The relentless work finally pays off with another revelation. It seems that these workers thrived on more than just bread and meat.
Looks like the spine of a little fish.
It's one of millions of tiny fish bones littering the site. So in addition to butchering meat, the workers of the lost city were bringing thousands of fish from the Nile and salting and drying it on an industrial scale. These weren't slave rations. These workers were being fed like Olympic athletes.
We have enough cattle bone to feed thousands and thousands of people if they ate meat every day over the better part of a century. In fact, just about the time it would have taken to build the 3 giant pyramids of Giza.
Now Mark had a good idea about what they ate. But where was all this feasting taking place? Then, near the bakeries, Mark finds the remains of a unique building with a strange arrangement of troughs and benches running its length.
We began to find underneath these benches limestone column bases, like this one. And from holes in the bench just above the base, we realized that slender wooden columns rose every 5 Egyptian cubits. We were, in fact, in Egypt's oldest columned hall.
On his hands and knees in that hall, Mark finds some bony clues.
As we excavated these troughs and benches and looked really close, we found little tiny fish bone embedded throughout it. We found loads of fish bone, like dried Christmas tree needles. How nice that another little set of fish bone should come up.
Were these just table scraps and crumbs from the world's first and oldest cafeteria? Maybe this was the place where groups of workers came to eat each morning before a strenuous day's work. Lehner was getting a much better idea of how they worked by seeing how they lived. But the pyramids were not built on fish, meat, and bread alone. These workers needed to sleep. We know where they were buried. But where would thousands of workers have laid down after toiling all day on behalf of their pharaoh? The man-god who would be laid to rest inside his pyramid. Dividing the workers into gangs revealed how the pyramid planners organized their men. It may give Mark Lehner clues to help him solve his latest problem. In addition to the bakeries, butcheries, and fish drying stalls, the streets of the pyramid town are lined with strange big buildings featuring long gallery-like rooms. The Egyptians did invent bowling, but these aren't bowling alleys.
So at first we thought, well, we don't know what this is. It's quite alien, and it doesn't fit our expectations at all.
Were these long rooms also for food production? What could the pyramid builders have been doing here? Then one morning, Mark had an idea. These galleries, more than 60 feet in length, could have been dormitories. Maybe this is where a whole crew of workers slept. If the long galleries were dormitories, could it be that this was where the Perfection Gang, or even a gang like the Friends of Khufu, slept? Maybe the gangs not only worked together, but like an army platoon, they shared a barracks too. This theory leaves another question for Mark. He thinks it only took about 25,000 workers to build the pyramids. There's room for about 2,000 in the dorms. So where did the rest of the workers sleep?
It's a good chance that the entire work site, the entire construction yard, was in fact a campsite. It's a very reasonable assumption that people were camped all over the quarry and on the pyramid itself during the time it was being built.
So maybe some of the hard laborers, the workforce that was probably brought in seasonally, lived closer to the pyramid and were cared for with good quality food by the people from the city. But overseers like Nesset Wessert, the man whose tomb will open shortly, and the skilled workers on the job were not campers. Where did they live? Mark was still missing key parts of his picture, but that was about to change. Toward the end of their digging season, Mark's team pushed the edges of the site further than ever before and uncovered a critical part of the puzzle.
It was only in the last few weeks when we moved this far east that we began to find these little chambers and these little houses.
At last, the city is beginning to make sense. Here in this corner are the houses for the more permanent pyramid workers and their families, the craftspeople, the overseers, the potters, weavers, and carpenters. Based on these new discoveries, both from Dr. Hawass and from his own site, Lehner is now able to create the most comprehensive picture of the Giza Plateau we've ever seen. The world's first industrial city, surrounded by houses for skilled craftsmen and their families, an extended campsite for seasonal workers, and an incredible building project. It is a portrait of ancient Egyptian power on the rise. At the southern edge of his site, Lehner found the remains of two massive stone walls, separated by a space equal to a modern sidewalk. Stone was a rare find in the mud brick of the lost city. It was for something monumental, almost royal, like the pyramids themselves. And these walls were big, almost 3 feet thick. Whatever this building housed, or guarded, it had to be extremely valuable.
These two walls, just the corners poking out, suggested that everything we had found already was simply an adjunct to whatever this was.
In other words, this was the most important building on the whole site. But what was it? Was it the boundary wall of a royal building? Littered throughout the site, they find evidence that it was. Fragments from the king's seal, used for closing sacks of grain or jars of wine. As they continued to dig inside the stone walls, the story entered the final act.
In the last few days, we've been digging in this big, sunken, rectangular area that's been filled with all this stone, debris, and rubble that you see here. And as we've been moving the stony rubble, we're finding these curious semicircular features made out of mud. These were once round silos, it's certain now. And there were a whole series of them. We have 7, 8, maybe there were dozens, one right next to another. And these silos must have been used for storing grain.
But why would silos, something we take for granted, be so important? These silos, tucked within the imposing stone walls, embody the heart of not only the lost city of the pyramids, but the entire pyramid complex. 4,500 years ago, food was frequently scarce, and grain would have been like gold, carefully controlled and guarded. Grain was the engine that powered the project. the source of the staple food, bread. If there had been no bread, there would have been no pyramids. The grain silos inside the royal building is where Nesset-Wessert may have spent many of his days. Checking the quantity of grain with his pharaoh might have been a routine duty. Ensuring that there was plenty of grain to feed the workers would have been his most important task, for plentiful grain was a guarantee that the king's pyramid would be completed before the king died.